You know, it was great when we could just do email. FaceTime, I've decided, is the greatest thing in the whole world.
It's great, yeah.
You know, I got to see I moved 1,500 miles away from my kids. And, you know, as a mother, sometimes knowing how they are is not even being able to hear it in their voice or hear it in their words, but you need to actually see it. And that I can do that. And, you know, my kids are in their 20s, but I get a little less of the anxiety of, is what they're telling me really how they're doing?
Yeah.
Because I can see them.
Yeah. Are they calling me from a gutter or something over there in the living room?
Exactly. Right. Or is that they're putting on a brave face and saying the brave words for mom, but yet when I can actually look in their eyes and see, this is really what they need.
The last time my mom tried to FaceTime me, I was drunk. So.
It's sort of like the debate we're having about feminism right now. A lot of people saying, oh, I'm not a feminist, because the term has been militarized.
Right.
To be, when you say feminist, oh, you mean someone who's militant, right? Whereas, no, what I'm talking about is someone who thinks women should be able to vote and get paid the same salary.
Yeah.
Like, do you agree with those things?
Human rights.
Guess what?
Yeah.
And then you have the person who's like, no, that I'm a humanist. It's like, no, that's actually a philosophy. Yes.
Feminism in particular, there became this perception of I can't be girly, I can't be feminine, I can't want to wear the high heels, I can't want to do the lipstick, I can't do that and still be a feminist. You know, I have to be on equal ground with a man all the time. Well, sometimes I don't want to be on equal ground with a man. I want him to open my car door, but I'm still very much a feminist.
Yeah, and we've also, I think it's interesting because with third wave feminism, we've also seen the rise of like the revival of the pinup and burlesque culture,
right?
And this idea that women can be beautiful and have full agency over their bodies and decide who the male gaze can apply to or not,
right?
But in a way that is still very much in keeping with feminism.
There's incredible power in having that persona, and we dismiss that for so long. And as much as there is power in not having that persona, in deciding that that's not the image I want to project.
Well, what you're talking about are options, and that's the problem.
That's it.
People have thought of feminism and try to put it in terms of what they already knew was, okay, this is the position women are in. Oh, they must be asking for something different.
Right.
What's the different position they want to be in? Whereas what was really being asked for was, no, I want to be able to choose how I'm perceived, what I can do.
Whether I want to be a housewife
idea.
or a CEO.
Right. One of the most feminist people I know is a stay-at-home mom. But it is a decision she made for herself.
Right.
It was not, her husband didn't ask her to do it. It is what evolved. And when they figured out the cost of childcare versus the cost of giving up a job, it made sense. And she's a writer, and she is, she's able to exist and let her philosophy be completely outside of her home, and she's able to reconcile them really beautifully. But she will periodically get comments on the things that she writes about how can you possibly be a feminist if you decided that you're grumble. I was like, no, they're not.
Exactly.
I feel like it's a double standard. It's like men can have very complex personalities. Right. They are more than one thing, and so often with women, they are one thing.
Right.
Well, it's the freedom to be able to have more than one story, right? So many of these movements, of these asks, have been around, I want to be me, why won't you let me be me? Whether it's gay rights, whether it's about racism, whether it's about feminism, it's like, this is who I am, why won't you let me be who I am? And the disconnect is the ruling class, generally speaking, rich white men, are like, I don't even understand the question. Like, I'm always able to be me. I can't even conceive of a world in which I couldn't be myself.
Me. Right.
Yeah.
So my wife's mother, when she first told her that she was dating me, way too many pronouns there. But like the first 3 questions out of the gate were something along the lines of, and this is so random, but does he smoke? Does he have a goatee? Is he a Republican? Which at the time, all 3 of those things were true. I've since stopped being a Republican. I've since stopped smoking. I still got the goatee. Fortunately, at the time, she only knew one of those things was true about the goatee. She didn't know that I smoked. She didn't know I was a Republican. So that kind of helped. But yeah, it's just sort of you never know what the standards are.
Yeah.
I
you
gotta
don't
ask
know.
though, what made you
What made you quit
leave?
smoking?
What made you leave the GOP?
It's funny. You were curious.
I knew that's where she was going, and I was just like,
Cut it off. Cut it
there's
off.
two different stories here. I
So,
bet.
yes.
Or maybe it's the same story. I don't
So
know.
it's interesting. Like a lot of Republicans, I was actually a libertarian and didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I sort of realized, you know what? Yeah, I'm a libertarian, but honestly, a lot of them, I'm much more aligned with what Democrats are pushing for than I am for necessarily the rules-based almost approach of a libertarian.
Yeah.
Sort of
Right.
like fully on principle. Maybe it's something that happens as you get older and you sort of say, you know what? Let's be
Yeah.
nice to people. Like honestly, a lot of those policy shifts came from the point of view like, yeah, I get it, you've got a point, but let's just try being nice to people. What about that?
Yeah.
I mean, like that's honestly how I ended up moving from one camp to the other.
I think I stopped identifying as a libertarian, even a small L libertarian, around the time Glenn Beck started saying that he was a libertarian.
Yeah, he really ruined it for
But
libertarians.
well, but I mean, I was raised pretty conservative, but also like did theater and did other art stuff, and so I had a lot of gay friends. And when I realized that by continuing to vote Republican, I was actually systemically denying my friends their rights to exist as happy human beings, it's like, okay, so that's changing. So third wave feminism is much broader and asks a lot more questions, and it's been interesting to see. There are a lot of women of color who ostensibly identify with everything that feminism is about, but don't identify themselves as feminists. Not in the way that celebrities are like, no, I'm not a feminist because I love men, but in a way that they've found themselves to be systematically excluded from feminism over the last 100 years.
Okay.
So they're trying to find, something that is compatible with the ideals, but is also something they can identify with.
Right.
Yeah, and there's this sort of sad history of any movement that's trying to create more equality often has some bastards in it. Because you look at the civil rights movement and the way they treated women, and you're like, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we're gonna have a sit-in. Oh, you girls, can you get us some coffee?
Right.
Literally,
Yeah.
something that happens.
Or like on a personal level, like how Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi interacted with women, and
So it's and then even within the feminist movement, it's sort of like how early on they treated gay women and how they treat and how they treated minorities, and sort of like
And
no matter
how they
far
treated men
you
who
go,
tried to be their allies.
Yeah.
Right.
but it's
You know,
like
that was
there's something in our DNA that's sort of like I need somebody to subjugate. Just give me somebody.
well, I mean, if you go back
Thanks,
to
America.
the beginning of civilization, that has been a reality. From the very beginning of civilization, there has been some degree of subjugation of someone. Whether it was your servant working in your house, whether it was, you came from a culture where men were the head of the household and everyone else, even the sons, were subjugated to the head of the household. Matriarchal cultures have always been the same way. Men were subjugated in matriarchal cultures, as well as you always had a servant class. You always had somebody that was taking care of you. And I think the only thing that's ever going to resolve a lot of these equality questions is when we accept that. That it is bred into who we are as humans to have this notion of there's always going to be some distinction. And by fighting against that, then we get to these places where we can't agree on anything.
Right?
I was at
Bad
dinner
idea.
last night with a 15-year-old who is a very bright girl. She's very smart. She's incredibly creative. She makes her own jewelry. She draws. She does all of these things. And when we were kind of talking about, what she's going to do, because I was joking, I'm still figuring out what I want to be when I grow up. And she goes, well, we can figure it out together because I don't know either. Which was kind of awesome.
That's brilliant.
It
I want to
was
make that show.
it was awesome.
Growing up.
So I'm talking with her, and it came all around to, well, whatever I want to do, I just want to make a lot of money.
Oh.
And I had to really I really started probing with her about why is this important? She goes, well, because then I can have all the things I want to have. And her dad is sitting across the table from us, and he's kind of looking at me with this, help me, because this is what I hear all the time, look on his face. And I'm realizing, wow, what a message that she's getting from society, because I know it's not coming from her father, because I know her father very well. This message that she's getting from society, and that you can only have what you really, really want if you make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so we had this really great conversation about, I told her the story about transitioning from making a whole lot of money in a very long career to going out on my own and making nothing and barely paying my bills, but 500 times happier. And it was the first time she had heard that story from me. And I actually could kind of see in her, okay, maybe this isn't the way. Maybe this isn't the message. But it was just fascinating to we make kids choose.
Well, granted, I don't have kids, so no idea. I just think about a friend of mine, known him for 20 years. He's a pretty well-known musician, but by day he manages a record store. He needs regular income and insurance and things like that. His wife is a professor of film and a filmmaker, right? So they have like these dual careers. I mean, two people each having sort of two different careers, right?
Yeah.
And their kids are exposed to this. And then when I come to visit, it's sort of like, what do I do? Well, again, I have two careers. It's like by day, yes, I do technical things and have a team and I work with a company. And then by night, I help, your dad manage his, persona and copyrights and things like that. It's sort of like, I don't do one thing either.
No.
And I think, at least, again, the kids that I know are seeing more of that because their parents are not giving up those things that they love. They are finding a way. Like, my parents went to work, came home, and then took care of us.
Yeah.
The most I remember was like my dad playing baseball on Sundays. Occasionally,
they had a
like
hobby,
when they could squeeze it in. Right.
Yeah.
Now, like most of my friends come to work and then tell me like, oh yeah, my band's practicing tonight, or I've got this show coming up that I've got to prep for. I feel like more people are finding ways to include that whatever creative expression in their day-to-day lives, and then their kids are going to see that.
I hope you're right.
And realize.
That's
I mean,
awesome.
I hope so
awesome.
too. Believe me, because I feel like it's a far healthier way of living.
And that's so interesting because architecture to me is art. And I mean, you look at, you go to Europe and you look at these amazing cathedrals or these castles, and they're
Nobody
art.
used AutoCAD for it.
That's true.
Which is mind-blowing.
Nobody used tractor trailers for them either. But I know, like they were pure art. There was no engineering. At least the way that we think of it. And so yes, I think that in most scientific applications, you need to think about the art behind them. There was a photography project that I saw a couple of years ago that was extreme close-ups of dyed DNA. So they'd used like the radioactive dye, and they'd taken these pictures, and they were gorgeous. And you would look at them, and they looked like modern art, or like somebody had taken a close-up of dew on a blade of grass. And this, like, no, this is what is inside every single one of us. Yeah. And to be able to see the art within the science, I think, there are programs now that are trying to get doctors to learn how to write. But then we have the problem of certain party in Congress saying like, no, we've got to build bridges, and bridges aren't beautiful. So yeah, I mean, the Ben Franklin Bridge is hideous. What are we? So trying to remind everybody and ourselves that there is a real space for the intersection of art and science, and we should encourage that and let it breathe instead of just saying like, no, you need to study engineering, and you need to know how to sequence the genome, and forget that that you used to love to play guitar.
So I assume none of you have any idea what I do during the day. I do many things, but one thing that I do that I really enjoy is I work with a group called Improv Science, which teaches improvisational theater techniques to basically academic scientists.
Amazing.
That is so cool.
Is that Alan Alda's project?
It's similar goals, different organization. And so I come at it, I worked in cognitive psychology and linguistics for a while.
Wow.
And then I got interested in science communication when I was trying to be in I was in an environment where things were supposed to be collaborative, but we didn't always understand each other. And so it was like we were teaching science to other scientists, and it was like, okay, how do you explain anthropology to somebody who has a PhD in glycoproteins.
Right.
You know, they probably haven't taken Anthro 101, but they're really smart people
Right.
who can learn a lot quickly. And so I thought, okay, teaching science to other scientists, got it. This is actually a problem, and even within a field. Like, I was going to conferences and going to colloquia. I was like, this is terrible, and I'm supposed to get out of bed in the morning and get excited about your work. Why? Oh dear. And I always compare it to, like, a film critic presumably remembers most films that they see during a year, but if an academic, how many talks do they go to?
Right.
And how many do they remember? So I started thinking about, like, okay, scientific presentation skills. And so that chapter ended, and I moved to Philly, and I got involved in improv comedy and started thinking about science communication and got hooked up with improv science. And there's a lot of overlap
That's
of,
so
like,
cool.
teaching,
Yeah.
listening to people who are working in teams, being advisors, being classroom educators, getting them to think about not just communication, but about problem solving techniques. And so, that's, that's one of the things I do.
No,
And that's exactly
awesome.
the sort of thing that, like, didn't really exist 20 years ago when I was
Didn't
supposed to start
exist
thinking about
2
my
years
career.
ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to see just like the evolution of online dating, because before I met my husband 8 years ago, it was kind of like, I was doing a little bit of online dating, and everybody was like, oh, you're meeting people on the internet? That's cool. And now, I mean, how many couples do you know whose partners and spouses are people that they met on?
Yeah.
I
Some
mean,
form. Yeah.
usually not Tinder, but on OkCupid or Match or eHarmony. Like, I went to a wedding in December. There was 2 people that had met on eHarmony.
Or
And
friends of friends on Facebook.
Yeah.
I actually
Yeah.
have a couple of friends that are getting married, and they met because they had mutual friends on Facebook and got involved in a conversation and
Yeah.
realized they really liked what each other had to say, and
took
Moved
in
it off
private
thread.
messages, and that's it. But it's now nobody even bats an eye at it.
No.
It's like, oh, you met online. That's awesome. Which site did you use?
I had a girlfriend, and it was probably about 10 years ago. She and the man she was marrying had met online, and they actually had constructed this wild story about having met in this convenience store because the families, had they known that they had met online, would have just completely freaked out and would have been completely against the wedding. And so they had this very elaborate story that all of their close friends got roped into helping support this very elaborate story about how they met in real life.
Yep.
And they actually had a relationship for about 6 months before they actually met in real life.
Oh wow.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was a very
So-
odd.
Yeah, first I think it's very healthy that they had 6 months to kind of feel each other out before they actually met in
Yeah.
person.
I think that's one of the
that
biggest
to me is a
benefits.
much saner approach than the typical dating. I'm going to meet a complete stranger in person,
Let's
knowing
fly
nothing
to
about
Tinder.
them.
Yeah, let's go
Stranger.
have coffee right now.
But
Yeah.
that's
But-
what I did with my ex-husband. I mean, there was like a day where he sent me an email. I wrote back. He wrote back to me, and he was in medical school, so he was, his hours were crazy. I was working full time and going to grad school, so my hours were crazy. And we started talking on the phone. It must have been like 10 p.m. like some night, the first time we ever spoke, and we were on the phone and we realized it's like midnight. And he's like, I really just want to go get a cup of coffee. I was like, all right, let's do it. The only place we could find, we realized how far apart we were from one another. So the only place we could meet was at a grocery store. So that was
That's
Oh my
amazing.
God.
that's what we told his family. Like we
You
met
met
at a grocery store.
I like how the grocery store, the convenience store, is considered like a healthier, saner place to
Than the
be.
internet.
Than
Yeah.
online.
Yeah.
It's like, have you been to a convenience store? Like,
Yeah.
Well,
And especially at midnight.
yeah.
well, I think it would be stranger now to tell people that you met at a grocery
Yeah.
store
Right.
than to
You,
tell
you
them
speak
that
to
you met on.
strangers at
Yeah.
grocery stores?
Exactly.
What the hell is wrong
Like,
with you,
Everybody
you
was
psycho?
staring at their phone in the
Yeah.
grocery store.
I mean,
How did you do that?
I met my husband at a Phillies game, and people are like, "You met at you met in the real world?
Yeah.
How does
you
that
talked
happen?
to a stranger, and then you went on a date with a stranger, and it's much more complicated than that. But yes, we actually met for the first time, having never interacted with one another, had not known that each other were on the planet at a Phillies game, and people like, were you like, did he spill beer on you?
My brother went on an OkCupid date a couple months ago with a young lady who her parents met through online dating. Well, not really online, but electronic in like 1978.
Oh wow!
Oh wow.
Wow.
Her father was like early AI work, like did his PhD with Marvin Minsky. And so the concept for her of telling her parents, like, oh, I'm like on OkCupid, nothing weird about it at all.
That's awesome.
Because it's a generation later and totally cool within that family.
Yeah, no, my parents
That's
were,
rare.
My parents were worried about the online dating. They were not worried about the cohabitation. They had lived together before they got married in the 70s, and so for them, even my grandmother was like, you wouldn't buy a car without taking it for a test drive. Just like, thank you.
Grandma.
Thank you, Grandma.
Nice.